Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and Josh, I took an informal poll with our listeners, and most of them wish you were frozen in carbonite.
Wow. All right. Just starting off with the insults here.
That's not me. That's what they said.
Yeah, somehow I doubt that was the case. But I'm here. I'm not frozen in carbonite. And we just finished up our season on the films of 1980. If you were listening, you heard our finale and our epilogue, but we're going back to it already because who cares? It's anarchy. We wanted to do a couple of bonus episodes for this season. And in particular, in this episode, we wanted to talk about the film that was actually number one at the box office. If you listen to earlier in the season, we did our box office champion episode on 9 to 5, which was number 2. But we wanted to come back to this little film because there seems to still be some interest in this franchise. It is The Empire Strikes Back, the second film in the never-ending Star Wars series. And we talked a lot about Star Wars in our 1977 season when we did an episode on the first film, but there's certainly plenty more to talk about. So here we are with The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, this is the first, not the first sequel we have ever covered, but the first sequel or piece of a series that we've ever covered that we've covered the first one of also. Do you know what I mean? So yes. It'll be cool because we've already covered Star Wars. So if you want to know about Mark Hamill's legacy, and Han Solo, whoever played him, go back and listen to that one. But we're going to just focus on Empire and the things that are just related to this that were not related to our first Star Wars episode. But of course, it's all related because it's Star Wars universe. And that's the universe we live in. Star Wars, everything, Marvel, everything, Star Marvel, everything.
Yes, it is the world we live in. So it is inescapable. And that's why we're doing an episode on it. Even though we escaped it earlier this season, we were drawn back in like a tractor beam. Is there a tractor beam in this movie? I think there isn't, but there is in one movie at least.
Like it's like we were on Hoth, and then we narrowly got away from all those AT-AT walkers. But the Empire tracked us down, Josh.
They did, and so here we are talking about this film, which is often considered the best film in the Star Wars series, even as this franchise has grown larger and larger with more movies and now a bunch of TV series. I think there's still that reputation of this film that has just grown since its initial release in 1980. And people generally still think of it as the best film in the series. And I guess we will see if we share that opinion. Obviously, this movie was a huge, huge hit. Of course, Star Wars itself, as we talked about in our Star Wars episode, was not a sure thing by any means, but turned out to be this amazingly popular movie. So, of course, going into this film, there was a much higher anticipation. There was a much greater budget for this film. Although George Lucas, to his credit, I think as we talked about in the last film, really had this foresight to maintain control over the franchise and finance this film himself and only retain entire creative control and only kind of license the distribution rights to 20th Century Fox. So the film ended up costing $30.5 million, which is certainly a lot of money for a film in 1980. And it was a budget that ballooned over the course of production, but it grossed $401.5 million worldwide on its initial release, and of course has been re-released a number of times in various formats. So eventually grossed, according to Wikipedia, between $538 and $549 million overall over the course of many decades, and probably will again. This is the kind of movie that even with streaming and all the home media, I bet you when we get to like 2030, and it's the 50th anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back, it'll be released in theaters again and make a bunch more money.
Well, that's if it takes that long, Josh. They might just be like, hey, it's cold outside because of climate change. You know what else was cold? Hoth. here's Empire Strikes Back re-release. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That certainly could be the case. Or if George Lucas decides to come out of his retirement to tinker with it yet again and add some new awful things to it, then it'll come out again. But for now, that's where it stands. We talked about in our Star Wars episode something that I actually personally was a bit surprised about, at how many Oscars Star Wars itself had been nominated, that not only was it this box office success, but it had been nominated for all these top awards, which is something that fans of Star Wars now complain about, that these genre films don't get that level of respect. But Empire is more along the lines of what modern sci-fi blockbusters get, in that it was nominated for 4 Oscars, but mainly in kind of technical categories. It won the Oscar for Best Sound and for Best Visual Effects. It was also nominated for Best Art Direction, and John Williams was nominated for Best Original Score. So not the same showing as the original. And I was surprised to see, too, that reviews at the time, even though this is now considered such a great film, that critics were kind of mixed on it at the time that it was released.
Yeah, and I think part of that is, obviously it's a darker tone, and a lot of them are like, where's the whimsy? And I personally love the darker tone. That's what attracted me to this movie in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that's what is generally praised about it at the time. But I can see, it's hard enough for us to get into the mentality of people seeing any of these movies that we talk about for the first time, but especially something like this that has become so ubiquitous, to imagine not knowing anything about it, or only knowing what you had seen in the first Star Wars, and thinking what the expectations would be and how people would have experienced this film for the first time. And you can imagine that subverting those expectations might have led to some mixed responses. Now, of course, all Star Wars media is just about fulfilling fan expectations. So that's all we get.
Yeah, it's I'm enjoying, the new Obi-Wan Kenobi show. I know we both watched it, and Mandalorian. I didn't watch Boba Fett. It's just oversaturation, as we talked about, this Marvel. It's like, how can you keep up with all this? Do you not have anything to do with your life? Are you just sitting in your apartment all day? Oh, never mind, Josh.
Well, I think what it is that, people like us, and we keep up with a lot of variety of movies and TV shows. And so it feels like, oh, how can we just spend all our time watching Star Wars and Marvel? Whereas a lot of fans, they don't. They have the time because all they do is watch Star Wars and Marvel stuff.
Yes. And to go back to our Swingers episode, Jon Favreau, the king of rebooting universes and expanding them into these worldwide monoliths.
Yes, he is. But I also found fascinating here that despite the success of Star Wars, that George Lucas, before Star Wars came out, had this plan in place that if Star Wars had not been a huge success, he still wanted to continue. So he would have made this lower budget sequel, and he commissioned a novel by the author Alan Dean Foster called Splinter of the Mind's Eye, that was set up as a sequel to the original Star Wars that he could produce on a lower budget. And it was fascinating to me the way that Lucas plans this stuff, that he's this mastermind, even going back to before Star Wars came out, where he thought, okay, I'm going to hire this novelist and I'm going to tell him, you have to essentially write me a low budget movie in a novel and use these locations and these props and these characters. And that'll be the template for my sequel if I don't make enough money. And of course, that's not what happened, but I just thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, and that novel came out.
Yes.
Have you ever read it?
I have not. Many years ago, before the Star Wars sequels came out, Timothy Zahn, and before there were like a million Star Wars novels, Timothy Zahn wrote a trilogy of Star Wars novels, starting with, I think it's called Heir to the Empire, that was set up as if those were like episodes 7, 8, and 9. And I remember reading those because those were a big deal and they were pretty good. But then I'm not enough of a Star Wars fan to read so many Star Wars novels. So I never read Splinter of the Mind's Eye, but it is basically the first Star Wars novel. So it has a lot of following among fans, I think. But just the process of that, to me, more than the book itself, whether it's good, was just fascinating, the way that Lucas is always thinking ahead like this because he wants to create this multimedia empire.
I have to agree with you, Josh.
Well, thank you, Jason.
Is that book considered canon now, or is it just some weird offshoot?
No, it's just some weird offshoot, because I don't know if it ever was, but even if it was at one point considered canon as like a side adventure in between the movies or whatever, when Disney bought Lucasfilm and started making new movies and new TV series, they basically said every novel, comic book, video game that has been released is no longer canon. They just erased it all. And so, which, the super hardcore Star Wars fans have very strong opinions about this stuff. But the bottom line was Disney wanted to set their own course for it and not have to be beholden to what some novelist wrote or whatever. So they just decided it was all. I mean, you can still buy the books. I'm sure there's actually a whole, I don't know, this is sort of getting away, but there's a whole controversy with Disney not paying royalties to the authors of these Star Wars spin-offs that were published before Disney bought the company, and claiming like, we don't have to do that. And Alan Dean Foster, in fact, was leading the charge to get Disney to pay him his royalties for Splinter of the Mind's Eye, as well as the like novelization of the first Star Wars movie. But yeah, that's sort of a side issue.
Give Disney a break. It's not like they have money to like just throw around.
Yeah, what are they going to do? Look for old contracts and pay what people are owed? I mean, who wants to do that? That's ridiculous.
They're just scraping by right now.
Yeah. So yeah, that was a whole thing. And Alan Dean Foster was actually like the most high profile because he's older and in poor health. And it's like he needs this money to live and Disney isn't going to give it to him. So wonderful stuff.
The happiest place on earth.
Exactly. So anyway, like I said, a lot of critics were not that into this film. But we'll start with somebody who I feel like we often end up with this guy as the curmudgeon who doesn't like stuff. But Gary Arnold in the Washington Post was a huge fan of this movie. And really, I feel like saw a lot of what people see in it as time has gone on. So he said, Empire turns out to be a stunning successor, a tense and pictorially dazzling science fiction chase melodrama that sustains 2 hours of elaborate adventure while sneaking up on you emotionally. Empire is a thrilling, witty, inventive continuation of Star Wars, but it also introduces a more serious approach and springs an astonishing plot twist, which promises to keep audiences buzzing and open up the story for deeper dramatic exploitation. Surprises are in store, perhaps unwelcome if you hoped for a strictly ingratiating reprise of the original movie, but potentially electrifying if you care for a new departure. It comes as a tantalizing shock to realize that George Lucas's delightful cinematic dream world has darker undercurrents and a more expansive framework than anticipated.
It's interesting to me because, we were little bebes when this one came out. So, for us, it all kind of fits in, Star Wars set the tone, and then we saw this, and then Jedi goes the complete opposite way. And then with these new ones, you have them kind of playing with different tones also. And Rogue One, I think, would be the closest to this as far as tone. So it's fun to hear that review of that time period and what a different take it was on the material that they were expecting.
Right. And it's fascinating also. I'm always fascinated about how much space movie reviewers used to get in the past. This is an extremely long review that Gary Arnold writes here. And he goes into a lot of speculation about what George Lucas is doing in a larger sense in terms of creating this whole fictional universe. And this was at the time when Lucas had started saying in interviews that he wanted to make 3 trilogies, which of course, took decades to actually come to pass. But the idea of creating this sort of never-ending universe, or at least something this expansive, just wasn't done. And the way that Gary Arnold is speculating on how this is going to, keep fans engaged for decades to come. I mean, and he's completely right about it, but that was something that no one had done at this point. So it is fascinating to see that perspective. And then to see the alternate perspective from other critics who really didn't get this at all.
Ooh, that sounds like a good transition to do your next review, Josh.
Well, actually, I have one more slightly positive review first. So this one is from Arthur Knight in The Hollywood Reporter, who said, while Empire doesn't quite measure up to Star Wars in the freshness and originality of its script, and the plethora of space operas that has been jamming the screens ever since Star Wars has somewhat lessened the novelty of city-sized ships sailing the stratosphere, nevertheless, this 20th Century Fox release remains a rattling good entertainment, a worthy successor to the original, and far and away the best of its kind since Star Wars itself. The Empire Strikes Back comes so loaded with ingenious effects and characters, so filled with hairbreadth escapes from devilishly devised perils, and is played out against some spectacular settings, some real, some studio built, that only the most churlish ticket buyer could complain that he wasn't getting his money's worth. So that's more of just it's a spectacle kind of take.
Hey, Josh, what were some of those other space operas that came out around this time?
I was wondering that too.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I'm sure probably a bunch of movies that we have forgotten about. I was trying to find Siskel and Ebert's review of this, which they seem to have not done, but they did like a special episode about sci-fi movies, and they talk about some. The Black Hole was one that they mentioned, which ironically was Disney's attempt to capitalize on Star Wars that generally was looked at as a sort of inferior attempt. And there's definitely a lot of like low budget movies from the late 70s and early 80s that attempt to capitalize on Star Wars. And I think a lot of which after many decades have kind of cult followings, but none of which have really lived up to, what they were going for, because people don't have George Lucas's imagination or his budget or whatever. But yeah, The Black Hole is the one I can think of offhand. And that was the one that Siskel and Ebert really trashed.
I always think of Flash Gordon, but, what do I know?
Yeah, no, Flash Gordon is a good one, too, because that was based on those old comic strips that were an influence for George Lucas. Wasn't it? It was Buck Rogers, right? That he was actually trying to get the rights to, but couldn't.
Well, I guess the Star Trek films were around this time as well.
Yeah, the first Star Trek movie came out around this time. And I'm sure that was one factor for Paramount deciding like, hey, we can bring back this old TV show and make a movie out of it, and there's an audience for it. Of course, Star Trek itself had a big following already, and that was one of the reasons, but I'm sure it's a factor as well.
Just wait till Jon Favreau gets his hands on it.
Oh God, I hope not. I'm a bigger, people always set up that dichotomy. I'm definitely a bigger Star Trek fan than a Star Wars fan, and I don't really want to see Jon Favreau ruin it.
Well, I like Prince better than Michael Jackson, so cool.
Okay, maybe Jon Favreau can reboot Prince.
He's got the money to, I think.
He does. He does indeed.
He's taking all that money that those Star Wars novelists don't get.
Right. He gets it all. So now on to the negative. Here's Vincent Canby in the New York Times. He says, The Empire Strikes Back is not a truly terrible movie. It's a nice movie. It's not by any means as nice as Star Wars. It's not as fresh and funny and surprising and witty, but it is nice and inoffensive, and in a way that no one associated with it need to be ashamed of, it's also silly. Attending to it is a lot like reading the middle of a comic book. It is amusing in fitful patches, but you're likely to find more beauty, suspense, discipline, craft, and art when watching a New York harbor pilot bring the Queen Elizabeth II into her Hudson River berth, which is what The Empire Strikes Back most reminds me of. It's a big, expensive, time-consuming, essentially mechanical operation.
First of all, the first half of that quote sounded like it was written by a middle schooler. So, and dude, what are you talking about? The action sequences are the best part of this movie.
Yeah, I think Canby here, and he goes on in a lot of ways too, is one who really just wanted Star Wars again and doesn't understand this larger project that George Lucas is going on. The idea that this movie doesn't have, that it's the middle of a story was something that was just not done. We're very used to that now. We see almost any blockbuster movie and we know that it's just a larger part of this sort of never-ending serial narrative, but that wasn't something that happened in 1980.
Right, but it had happened in books before, so chill out, dog.
Yeah, and comic books, as he points out, but of course this was also an era in which comic books were very much looked down upon by, a movie critic for the New York Times or someone. There's more to that review. It's an extremely snobby review where he dismisses the idea of why are we even reviewing something like this? But I sit at my typewriter here with the prospect of writing about this movie. And, he's just so dismissive about it.
What a dingus.
He is quite a dingus. So, as I'm sure we've mentioned multiple times, as we've quoted him in this.
As Rob Reiner was the first official director of Awesome Movie Year, Vincent Canby is the first official critic dingus of Awesome Movie Year.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, we had all seen this movie before, probably at least a few times. So, but none of us are big Star Wars aficionados, I guess. Did you see this as a kid, Jason?
Yeah, I saw it as a kid. I saw it as an adult. I saw it. I mean, I'm not a huge aficionado, but I've seen every movie except Solo because I just got burned out on it. And, I do watch some of the TV shows, like I said. So for someone who's not like a fanboy, I've really seen a lot. And I think most of us are in the same boat.
Right, because it's just inescapable, essentially. So, yeah, I saw this as a kid, I'm sure, on VHS or whatever. But I mean, this is one of those things where I think for all of us, we're all at the age where it would have, like, a lot of people our age saw this when we did and just became consumed by it. And I never really did. I saw it as a kid. I probably saw bits and pieces of it multiple times because people watched it at slumber parties and things like that. As I've said on our Star Wars episode, I was friends with Nathan Hamill as a kid, Mark Hamill's son. So I certainly was surrounded by this stuff. And I thought it was cool, but I never remember being like that super immersed in it, per se.
I was always like, I thought this was the best one, I think, throughout my entire life. And now I lean towards this or Rogue One. But it's interesting, I know, to jump ahead, like on this watch, I did not like it as much as all the other times. And I wonder why that is.
Yeah, I think it's probably the best one too, but it's the best of movies that like overall I don't have like a huge amount of enthusiasm for. And I liked it fine. I enjoyed it this time, definitely. The last time I watched it, I think, was right before The Force Awakens came out in 2015. So, it's been a while. But it's not a kind of movie that I am like driven to revisit, except for like if we have a podcast about it or whatever. Whereas I think so many people will just watch this as like just in the background or something to do every so often because it comforts them.
What about you, Dave? What's your history with this one?
I probably saw it as a kid, but the first time I remember watching it was the re-release. Was it 97?
Yeah.
With the special effects updated. And I hadn't seen it since then. But
oh, wow. So like 25 years you hadn't seen this film?
Yeah, no. And it really held up for me. I mean, I know a lot of people consider it the best one. I think it probably is outside of The Last Jedi, which, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people on the internet that hate me for saying, but that is the best Star Wars movie.
Well, I mean, and a lot of people love that movie. It's it's polarizing, but, a lot of people who think it's brilliant and is.
That was the last one, right? Is that
no, that's the second to last.
Yeah, it was that's the Rian Johnson one that was the middle of the last trilogy. The Rise of Skywalker was the last
where they had
one.
good ideas for a change, and then JJ came in and just said, "No, none of that. Let's get rid of all."
Right. Well,
there's just so many of them. I can't remember which one's which.
Yeah. So we can maybe talk about more of that later. So, I mean, obviously, as with the original Star Wars, there's so much to say about the background of this film. Jason, what would you want to get in here? Anything else on it?
Yeah, well, Josh, we're talking about the writers. The science fiction writer Leigh Brackett wrote the first draft of this and then sadly died of cancer while, they were going to go make their changes. So that's when Lucas then wrote another draft of it. And that had he changed a ton of stuff. And then he brought in Lawrence Kasdan. Of course, this is, one of the biggest writers in Hollywood, Lawrence Kasdan. Kasdan kind of put it together. But Lucas fought to continue to have Brackett's name on there and paid the family. So I thought that was really cool. So I just wanted to bring that up, and now I'll leave you alone for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, that is cool. And it's, you mentioned that Lawrence Kasdan is one of the biggest writers in Hollywood, which is true, but this was his first credit. This was his first writing credit. So Lucas really, brought him in and gave him this huge platform, obviously on a movie that was basically guaranteed to be a huge success.
I like, obviously, the locations. I think they did a great job, finding those spaces in Norway. And then Lucas himself paid for the construction of the studio in England for them to do so much of the work. So this kind of idea that you're talking about of just him as, no pun intended, an empire builder, just goes to show he's always thinking ahead like that.
Right. And he stepped back from directing and hired Irvin Kershner to direct, so that he could focus on building Industrial Light and Magic, his special effects company, which is, again, so much foresight because this company is going to become basically the dominant force in special effects for the next 40 years. And he realized that that was what he should be giving his attention to. So a lot of credit to George Lucas for that kind of stuff.
Right. And you had mentioned the Oscars. It won a BAFTA for music for John Williams, and it won People's Choice for favorite motion picture. And it won 4 Saturn Awards and 2 Grammys for John Williams. So it got its just due.
Yeah, but I think that, again, that sets up the pattern for the later films, which is that John Williams gets that respect. And then everything else is just like technical awards and, fan awards like the People's Choice or the Saturn Awards.
Well, I mean, who did you want to give Hayden Christensen a Best Actor award, Josh?
No, I'm not saying it's deserved or undeserved. I'm just saying that that's been the trend for these films going forward.
Gotcha.
So we'll come back in a moment and talk about our general thoughts on The Empire Strikes Back. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this special bonus episode of our season on the films of 1980, we are talking about The Empire Strikes Back, which was the actual box office champion of 1980 and juggernaut of popular culture for the next forever, basically, until we all die. And beyond, really.
Well, I mean, when humans have to go live in space, it's just going to have more resonance.
Yeah, exactly. It is, and they'll just start making these movies like on the actual moon, like Tom Cruise making his space movie that's coming up. So,
is he just shooting that in space, or is he actually going to the moon, Josh?
No, just space. Don't give Tom Cruise too much credit. Tom Cruise is only going into space. He's not going to the moon.
I mean, but if you think, what was it, Apollo, the Tom Hanks one?
Yeah, with, Apollo 13.
Right, they did 0G shooting, so
yeah, but
whatever,
they didn't do it in actual space. They just did it in the
close
upper
to
atmosphere. I don't.
Yeah,
whatever.
Right.
This is not relevant. Star Wars not shot in space. Just to be clear about that.
I might have to question you on that one.
So we're saying this is the best of the Star Wars movies. What makes it the best?
To me, right away, the darker tone. I know people like that whimsy in some of them, but like I said, Rogue One was the same thing to me. I like how dark it is. I like that, a lot of the time the good guys don't win in this one and in that one. And I think the worlds are really cool in this one. I like the atmosphere, as we said, Hoth and the Sky City and Dagobah. Is that how you pronounce it?
I think it's Dagobah.
Dagobah. And I also think the interplay with Leia and Han is the best in this one. There's a lot of action, like there's a lot of movement for that. Like they're always trying to fix something. But that kind of, flirtiness while they're doing that is a lot of fun. Yeah,
it is. I think what struck me this time was not only yes, it's darker, although I think we've seen so many dark, even big blockbuster type movies that maybe that darkness feels exaggerated now. I mean, it still is full of whimsy and it's full of quips and humor and all that kind of stuff that people enjoyed in that first movie. But you're right about the idea that this is about the good guys not winning, that it's just one setback after another, and it ends with the furthest setback of all, and we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we do know what's going to happen, but if you were watching the movie at the time that it was released, you didn't know what was going to happen. And I think because this wasn't such a corporate behemoth, that if you were watching this movie in 1980, you could have thought maybe Luke will die, maybe Han will die. It was possible at that time, even though now we're like, no way would that happen.
Well, I'm going to spoil another movie that I think everyone in the world has seen, but it's like that first part of Avengers Endgame. Is that the one where Thanos makes the entire world disappear? And I was like, I love that. I wish that was the end of the series, but
right.
To me, I get it. Okay, you can bring them back and have the hero's redemption, but it means so much more when you put these end of the world obstacles in front of them.
Sure. And you're right, especially with those Marvel movies and any big blockbuster franchise. I think, Dave, you were just talking about on the Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces group about the Fast and Furious franchise and how they keep bringing people back from the dead, and even here, right? We had Obi-Wan Kenobi die. It was a very important moment in the first movie, and he's still dead, but being dead doesn't seem to really hinder him all that much. And he's hanging out and giving Luke advice.
Yeah.
So already we've got that.
Well, he's in the afterlife, and so that whole thing with Alec Guinness, at this point in time, his his eyesight was so bad he couldn't be on set because of the lights and everything. So they basically they sweetheart dealed him into coming back, and I'm sure they made it comfortable for him. But basically, he shot for like a day or something like that, and Lucas gave him 0.25% of the gross profits on that. So
yeah, which I'm sure was a massive amount of money.
Right.
Wow.
But he's so important, and the stuff with him. And this is the first time we see Yoda in the Star Wars series, and that relationship is so important. And I think that's another thing people love about this is it's the first time you see Yoda, and it's the first time you see Boba Fett. So it's got its moments.
Yeah, I mean, it does introduce these new characters that went on to be essential parts of the franchise. Also, Lando Calrissian is seen for the first time in this film. The Emperor, who we all, I'm sure, watched the special edition this time if we watched it on Disney Plus. So we get to see Ian McDiarmid as the Emperor, who's been inserted, even though he wasn't actually in this movie originally. But the character of the Emperor became a huge deal, especially in the prequels, building up to Darth Vader's creation or whatever.
Which is the one where he's like a supernatural dead power thing? I don't know.
That's the Rise of Skywalker, the most recent
the last one.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so bad.
Yeah,
terrible.
They inserted him back in so that they could retcon the origin for Rey, the Daisy Ridley character. Yeah, a lot of bad decisions later on in various ways, but many of those bad decisions, or the sort of trend of being able to retcon stuff, come from George Lucas. George Lucas is the one who inserted Ian McDiarmid back into this film after he was cast as the Emperor. He's the one who made all these changes that we now see that are the only really reasonable way to watch this movie is the version that Lucas has added all of these things to.
But I didn't mind that in this one, as opposed to when we talked about Star Wars and, they had those like totally out of place effects of Jabba the Hutt and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's less obtrusive in this one than it is there. I definitely noticed with Ian McDiarmid, I'm like, that doesn't look like a guy from 1980 doing that scene talking to Darth Vader. And there is one moment with Cloud City, the city in the sky where Lando Calrissian lives, where
Bespin.
On Bespin, the planet Bespin, yes. And some of the shots seem to be the original effects with like miniatures and stuff. And then some of them are added CGI shots. And the city doesn't even look the same. They look very different. And that to me was distracting. There was at least one shot where I was like, this doesn't look like what I just saw.
And we've talked about this before. Those kind of like real effects, those in-camera effects and the set building, they go such a long way. I don't know why you would want to ruin those.
Right. No, I agree. And I think it's very impressive. And I think I said this maybe when we talked about Star Wars, and it's less noticeable here, but CGI from 1997, I feel like has aged worse than practical effects from 1977. And so now it doesn't look as good. But we're stuck with it.
So Josh, let's discuss the ending here.
Okay.
If you don't know this movie, The Empire Strikes Back, go watch it now. So many things happen, right? Like they take Han Solo, who might be the most beloved hero of, right, and they freeze him in carbonite, like our audience wants to do to you. So we don't know if he's alive or dead, or we know he's alive in the carbonite, but we don't know what's going to happen to him. And I could see a lot of the crowd being like, "Why would they do that to Han?" and everything like that. We find out obviously the biggest pop cultural reveal of all time that Darth Vader is Luke's father, right?
Yeah,
and so it really does go super dark there at the end.
Yeah, it does. And that's another thing that I was trying to think. What would it be like to have seen Star Wars and be in the theater watching this movie and hear that Darth Vader is Luke's father? Like, it's such a cliche. Anyone who has never seen a Star Wars movie knows that Darth Vader is Luke's father. But like, I can't even imagine what it would have been like to hear that for the first time and to just be like blown away by, and Gary Arnold talks about it a bit in his review about how like this is such an amazing twist and it adds so much for the future of the franchise and makes you rethink what came before and all that. And, now we just kind of take it for granted.
Right. And we know that like Mark Hamill wasn't a big fan of the idea of Luke Skywalker and Leia being brother and sister. But I like those little sprinkles that they put in, where Luke is like the last hope. And then they're like, no, there is Yoda says there is another one. I love stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, and again, Lucas is very good at like planting those seeds to get people to be like, what does that mean? I can't wait to find out. I have to see the next movie. And this cliffhanger that unlike now where there's just like constant Star Wars that is inescapable, people had to wait like 3 years to see the next movie with nothing in between other than rewatching the first two.
And then the next one is so different tonally from this one. That's like the most childish kind of, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. I mean, that's the most like family friendly one of the bunch.
Right. With the Ewoks and whatever. And it does go back to Lucas's idea that he wanted these to be movies for kids, essentially. But I think other than the darkness there is in this film, but I also thought watching it this time, like the character development here, where the characters in Star Wars are very one-dimensional. And that's probably by design. It's meant to be like this old serial or whatever. But he really spends time in this film delving into Leia and maybe not so much Han, but Leia and Luke and their emotional journeys. Leia really steps up as this leader. I mean, this is a very progressive for 1980 depiction of a woman in a genre film who is a strategic leader and is planning attacks and things like that, and is not just like a damsel in distress. So I was impressed with that stuff this time around.
Right. And I had read that the Brackett original screenplay had her more as that damsel in distress. So even the fact that he was able to change that afterwards is pretty cool. On the other side, really, it did nothing for the progress of Wookiees.
Yeah, I suppose. Chewbacca, hey, well, I guess he doesn't really. He keeps being told to fix stuff and then he fails. So.
Goes off with Lando. Okay, here's a few problems I have with the characters, Josh.
Let's hear it.
First of all, when Luke goes to train with Yoda, he's a real knob job on that. He's so impatient and just like at some point, if I was Yoda, I'd be like, just get out of here, you little bitch, So, and he does. It's interesting that he does go against both Yoda and Ben's advice there, and I guess he does it for a good reason. But at the same time, if he's supposed to learn the Force and become a Jedi, you would think he would stay and train.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that is part of his character development, that he remains this young, impulsive guy, and even though he has a better understanding of his destiny or whatever, he still doesn't have the patience that is needed. And you want to set up the tension. Again, we know that he's not going to turn to the dark side, but at the time, I think Lucas wants to set up the idea that the audience might think maybe he will, maybe he'll go with Darth Vader and turn evil.
The one thing I thought was strange about that is Yoda, I think, says to him, if you go while your reason may be good, it's going to be the cause of the downfall of all this. And it wasn't at all.
Well, it wasn't eventually, but in the moment, Han is frozen in carbonite and Leia is, well, I guess Leia's okay, but she is running away. And he certainly doesn't make things any better by going to Cloud City and attempting to rescue him.
Here's my question, right?
And he gets his hand cut off.
Well, yes, I'm glad you brought that up.
He's hand solo.
Heyo.
Sorry. I had to use that there.
That was fantastic. Bravo,
yeah,
Josh. But let's talk about that, because at the beginning of the movie, right, he's hanging upside down and that beast is going to eat him, right? And he uses the Force to like get the lightsaber to come over to him. So when his hand gets chopped off, why didn't he just use the Force to bring it back to his body?
Well, he might be able to, but he can't reattach it. It would just be like hovering there.
I mean, would it? I don't know. You don't know you're not a Jedi master. You don't know what can and can't happen.
I don't think it's ever been established in any Star Wars lore that Jedis can reattach severed limbs.
The John Wayne Bobbitt Star Wars parody.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Hey, Josh, what about Lando? Cool guy Lando there. He betrays everybody too.
He does. I mean, and he betrays them like immediately. He, in fact, pre-betrays them because he does it before they even arrive.
He pre-betrays them.
Yeah. But I think he explains his reason. And I mean, and that's part of the sort of darkness or complexity of this movie, that like this guy has sold them out to the Empire, but then he has a change of heart, or maybe he doesn't even have a change of heart. He realizes, oh, Darth Vader is not going to follow through on things he's promised, and I'm screwed too, so I might as well go with Leia. That's more than just a one-dimensional character.
Yeah, with great hair.
With great hair and the cape. I mean, you got to love that. And I also loved about Lando with the cape that it's obviously an extremely impractical piece of attire, but at one point he gets like roughed up or something, and then he's like, I got to put the cape back on. He just like swishes it back on.
Yeah, I would wear a cape. I like that.
I bet you would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, we've gone over Star Wars and we've talked about a lot of the cool things here. Like, I think the AT walkers are cool, and there's a lot of fun stuff here. But is there anything that you loved or hated in this movie, either of you guys?
I mean, there's definitely not anything that I hated in this movie. I do feel like it's so ubiquitous and it's so familiar that it's maybe sometimes difficult to feel that like sense of wonder about it after you watch it again. So there's also really not anything that I loved about this movie, but I did, like I said, I appreciate the amount of world building and character development that goes into this film, and that Lucas is really using that larger canvas. You really get a sense in this film, I think far more than the original, that this takes place in this vast universe of different characters and different planets and different species. And you can envision this whole other set of stories that will come later.
Yeah, I mean, you might even say it took place in a galaxy far, far away.
You might. But I feel like it's more of that, whereas Star Wars will tell you that it takes place in a galaxy far, far away, but a lot of it just takes place like in a room.
In a room far, far away.
Right, exactly. and that's, for practical reasons, because Lucas could only do so much with that film, but he can do a lot more here. And he really, again, it goes to his overall vision for this as more than just this one movie. And I appreciated that this time. So
I think that we're not giving enough credit to Darth Vader and how much he solidifies himself as an awesome villain in this movie.
Yeah, that's true. He is very menacing, and he keeps killing all his underlings really unnecessarily, because
treats them all like shit, basically.
He's going to run out of them eventually. But yeah, he's very scary. And I think, again, that moment of him telling Luke, I am your father, it's like, holy shit, this super scary guy is Luke's father. How is Luke going to handle that? And, we brush over it now, but it's a big, big deal.
He handles it by going down a super fun slide. Whee!
Yeah. Thank you.
But by the way, real quick, before we wrap up this segment, he doesn't say, Luke, I am your father.
That is true.
That kind of blew my mind on this rewatch.
Yeah, he just says, I am your father. And
yeah.
He says Luke something, and then he
something,
says, I am your father.
something, and then he gets to it.
Well, it's like a lot of those fans, like, they never say play it again, Sam, in Casablanca, and Captain Kirk never said beam me up, Scotty, things like that. People just assume it at this point.
The world is fake, man.
Exactly. Shaq never, or what was it? Sinbad never starred as a genie, or whatever the hell that is.
Maybe not on this planet, but again, in a galaxy far, far away.
Exactly. Yeah. So should we rate this out of 5? I don't know. Severed Luke Skywalker hands.
Sure. We love severed body parts for our rating system.
I guess we do. Yeah.
So I used to have this as 4, and on this one, I just gave it 3. I don't know. It just didn't motor along for me, and I found certain things annoying. But hey, maybe I watch it again in a year or two, and it gets back to 4.
Yeah, I give this a 3.5 severed hands. So sever the severed hand in half one time, which to me is like, that's the best rating I can give any of these movies, because they're fun, but they just don't really reach me in any greater way than that. So Dave?
I'm going to 4. I mean, it's a fun movie, and as the best Star Wars, like I said, outside of The Last Jedi, I mean, it's got to be a little bit on the high end,
Sure. And I mean, I'm sure Jason and I are rating it much lower than most Star Wars fans would. But to me, it's like, even the best of these is just like a fun little time, and it won't particularly stay with me.
Well, I mean, but like I said, I love this one so I don't know. It just, for some reason, this watch just didn't do it for me. So.
Yeah, well, just watch it every day for the next month, because that's what people do.
All right. That sounds like a plan.
Yeah. So we'll come back in a moment and talk about the legacy of The Empire Strikes Back. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this special bonus episode of our season on the films of 1980, we are talking about The Empire Strikes Back, the second film in the never-ending Star Wars series, and the actual box office champion of 1980. And there's a lot of legacy. As we said earlier, we talked a lot about this in our episode on the original Star Wars. So some of those big things we're going to gloss over. But there are a lot of new elements introduced in this film that went on to be a big deal. I mean, I think simply the idea of Star Wars as this ongoing franchise, of course, is begun here because Lucas not only is able to make a sequel, but is able to make a sequel that ends on all these cliffhangers because he knows for sure there's going to be another movie. And he's able to go in the press and say, I'm going to make 9 movies. I'm going to make 3 trilogies. And people are like, oh, okay, cool. They believe him. So I think that idea, like this movie to me, even more so than the original Star Wars, is the template for like the modern blockbuster film. Gonna take some time to think about that.
I'm gonna noodle on that one for a little while. So, I mean, on the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, like you said, Josh, he has been. I mean, he had this plan all along.
Well, right, but he wasn't able to execute it in the same way early on. He had to kind of hedge his bets in the first Star Wars because he didn't know if it was going to work out. Like, again, like hiring Alan Dean Foster to write that novel, he didn't know. But now he's able to really put his full sort of creative vision into place with this. And I just think also like the structure of this movie where it's like different set pieces in different places and cutting back and forth. Like we expect that out of every big action movie now, that there's going to be like, oh yeah, we're going to start with this introductory scene where there's going to be some action in one place. And then we're going to, whether it's a Fast and Furious movie or a Mission Impossible movie or a Marvel superhero movie or a Star Wars movie or any of these major franchises, they're all structured like The Empire Strikes Back.
No, that's a fair point. And, I remember when we talked about Star Wars, we talked about, kind of how slow it was at the beginning. So this one comes right out with the rocket boosters and then it goes a little slow in the middle. But Josh, do you want to give any credit to Irvin Kershner or are you just going to just say he didn't do anything here?
Well, sure. I mean, I think a lot of what Irvin Kershner deserves credit here for is the fact that the performances are less stiff in this film, that Lucas is obviously notoriously not a great director at working with actors. And I'm sure Kershner did a better job of that, allowed for some improvisation and things like that. And the character development, too. I feel like that's something that he was probably able to work with being directly on set, whereas the big picture stuff still comes from Lucas.
Right. And it's so strange because like this was, as we have said, the highest grossing film and a lot of people's favorite. And like Irvin Kershner really didn't do, I mean, he did Never Say Never Again after this, but he never became a big director. He was a working director, but that was, this was it.
Right. I mean, and I think because Lucas is so indelibly associated with this, and even in reviews in 1980, there was at least one review that basically dismissed him like, oh yeah, he's the director, but you get the sense that Lucas is pulling all the strings. It might have been Vincent Canby who said that. So I think even at the time, they're minimizing his contributions. And yeah, he went on to direct only 2 more theatrical movies after this, both famous sequels, Never Say Never Again, which we talked about in our You Only Live Twice episode, which is sort of the weird unofficial James Bond movie with Sean Connery returning. And then he also directed RoboCop 2, which I loved as a kid, but I think is probably very bad. And then he spent the next 20 years doing like a handful of TV episodes and mainly working as a college professor before he died in 2010. So yeah, never became this big director that you would think he might have been.
Where was he a college professor? That would have been awesome to be like, yo, my teacher directed Empire Strikes Back.
Right. Yeah. He had worked as a professor before this as well. Like that was something that he did throughout his career. He taught at USC, which of course is, the alma mater of George Lucas. The Maryland Institute for Technology in the Humanities at the University of Maryland, where he was later in his career. But I mean, it seemed like something that maybe, that he probably had a passion for, that he did for many years.
Right. That's cool.
Yeah. So, good for him for giving back. And maybe he turned down the opportunity to direct Return of the Jedi. So maybe he didn't necessarily want to become this big blockbuster director.
The biggest name from the technical side, obviously, other than, or the world building side, shall we say, other than George Lucas, is Lawrence Kasdan, who is synonymous with the Star Wars franchise. And of course, was so instrumental in this last reboot and kind of recharging the franchise with J.J. Abrams before Favreau kind of took it over. But, you know, he, like we said, he's one of the most prolific writers in Hollywood. And, you know, The Big Chill, The Accidental Tourist, Body Heat, he directed those movies as well. And then, of course, you know, Indiana Jones. So he's done all right for himself.
Yeah, he's hugely influential and successful, and was a big part of the revitalization of Star Wars. Not only him, but also his sons, Jake Kasdan and John Kasdan, very successful. John Kasdan was the one, I think, who worked with him on the screenplay for Solo. So like a dynasty going on here in Hollywood with this family.
Do you like Raiders of the Lost Ark better than the Star Wars movies?
No, I don't know. I haven't seen Raiders of the Lost Ark in a while. I think those movies are also, those Indiana Jones movies are like, they're fun, but I was never obsessed with them or anything like that.
Peter Shishki, I'm sure I'm butchering his name, the director of photography, who did a great job in this, was the director of photography on the Rocky Horror Picture Show and a lot of Cronenberg movies, including Crash, which we covered, and Eastern Promises, History of Violence, and another, I guess, I'm not going to call it a space opera, but a space invasion movie, Mars Attacks.
Yeah, very different kind of movie, but it does involve space. So, I mean, the special editions also are a big legacy that were released in 97. And as we said, is basically the only accessible way to see these movies now. And so we see this with Ian McDiarmid as the Emperor. We see it also with Tamura Morrison, who plays Boba Fett in the recent, Book of Boba Fett TV series, as well as played the predecessors of Boba Fett in the prequels. And he is now heard as the voice of Boba Fett in this film. So, you're missing certain aspects. And it was interesting to me, you watch this movie, even the special edition, and the credits still credit the original actors who've been erased from this film. Jeremy Bulloch, who played Boba Fett, and the stand-ins who played the Emperor, and I forget who it was who did the voice of the Emperor. But, their contributions have been basically like deleted from canon.
Except not anymore because of you, Josh.
Yeah, I'm bringing...
Well, you keep their legacy alive.
I actually was tempted to find the despecialized editions, which are the fan versions that restore the original elements, but also have, high quality picture. And it's just a pain in the ass. You have to do it on like a BitTorrent or something. And it just didn't seem worth the effort. But it's sad that that's the only way to watch it in its original form.
Well, not sad is the career of Billy D. Williams. Lady Sings the Blues, and constantly working, even to this day. I think we all remember him for Colt 45 commercials growing up, right? But sure. He's always just such a cool guy, smooth guy. And he works, like I said, to this day. So good for Billy D. And of course, we got to mention Frank Oz, the voice of Yoda, one of the greatest performers in all of entertainment history. And I'm not saying that because of Yoda. I'm saying that because of his contribution to the Muppets. I love me some Frank Oz. He's also directed some very good movies. I think What About Bob? Stuff
yes.
Like that.
Yeah. And Billy D. Williams, he's in Return of the Jedi, but he also then returned to the role of Lando in The Rise of Skywalker, which is maybe not a good movie. And I feel like Lando in that movie doesn't really do anything of value, but he's there. And Billy D. Williams got to play him again. And there's still, I feel like there's still these rumors, Donald Glover played the younger version of Lando in Solo, which I feel like is kind of an underrated movie. And he did a very good job of it in that film, Donald Glover. And there's rumors still that there will be a Lando TV series that might include both Donald Glover and Billy D. Williams, which Jason does not want to watch.
I can't. It's just too much, man. So, did you know there was a 1982 radio play of this film, The Empire Strikes Back, Josh?
Oh, no, that's cool. I didn't realize that was a big thing in like the 30s and 40s. There were always radio play versions of movies. So I did not know that. Did it have the same cast?
I don't know.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I wanted to also, you talked about Frank Oz, but Yoda as a character, is introduced in this film and again becomes such a huge, huge part of the Star Wars franchise. He's in the prequels as a CGI character mostly, but still voiced by Frank Oz. And then, of course, we have Grogu, the baby Yoda, in The Mandalorian, who is another huge, huge deal. And I think Frank Oz was like not happy with something, with Grogu or something. Frank Oz has been kind of down on Star Wars lately.
I think on the Muppets too, because I think they kind of have like pushed him out. But he's so talented, Frank Oz.
Yeah, Disney of course also now owns the Muppets, so they're just pushing him out of everything.
So maybe we can have finally the love triangle between Miss Piggy, Kermit, and Yoda.
Yeah, oh boy. That's very important. Of course, I also want to mention Dave. I'm sure also appreciates the Weird Al Yankovic song "Yoda."
Yes.
A parody of Lola by the Kinks.
Well, I think that wraps this one up, Josh.
Sorry, I had to get that. I had to get that in there. That might actually, I mean, Boba Fett, you also mentioned, who became such a huge deal. And I don't think any of us saw his TV series recently. Jason, did you watch that?
No, not that one.
Yeah, but the one currently coming out is the Obi-Wan Kenobi series with Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan. And I watched the first episode of it. I don't know. Did you watch more of it?
I watched the first, but I plan on watching the rest. I did enjoy it.
Yeah, it was not bad. And I think Ewan McGregor really it's a fine line where he's channeling Alec Guinness, but he doesn't just sound like he's doing an impression of Alec Guinness. I feel like he treads that line very well and, does a good job bringing that character to life. So, and as important as the Weird Al song, just the last thing, one of the famous lines here, Leia calling Han a scruffy nerf herder.
Right, the band nerf herder.
For the band nerf herder.
Thanks, Josh.
Nice.
Good
Let's make sure to end on that.
So, well played.
So that is The Empire Strikes Back, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Check us out on social media.
Sure, why not? I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or Jay Harris Comedy on all the socials. My website, Go for Jason, I think is still in a galaxy far, far away, but I think we're going to update it soon.
Oh, wow. The force will be with it.
All right. And Josh, we're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter. And Dave, is this episode going up in our feed or on your blood-sucking Patreon that we never see money from?
No, this is going out to all of our listeners, but we do have a special bonus episode that will be on the Patreon.
So Fat Cat Dave can continue lining his pockets.
From all we're at double digits on the
sure
Patreon
are.
subscribers.
We should be. Yeah, that means Josh, you have to start doing all those things that we talked about in other episodes.
Was it really? It was just a double digits. I don't even remember what any of those things were. It wasn't just me. It was you also.
We'll have a meeting soon.
Yeah,
we'll
as long as Josh is wrestling someone when he's covered in oil, I think we've covered the rules here.
I don't think we need any of that stuff. I am at joshbellhateseverything.com, where I do have some things I've written related to Star Wars over the years, probably. At Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on Twitter. And listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod.
And so, Jason, we do have another bonus episode for this season that's going to be available on Patreon. What is that episode?
Josh, you can't get through 1980 without talking about Raging Bull, Martin Scorsese. And we did talk about it a little on our Ordinary People episode. So I'm excited to deep dive that one.
So, Dave, where can people find that Patreon?
It is the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, and you can find that at patreon.com/bydavidrosen.
So check that out, sign up, and hear our episode on Raging Bull. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.
Anything else that you wanted to add about the band Nerf Herder? What is your favorite Nerf Herder song?
They did have that one song, right? Was it? Was the drummer from Def Leppard only had one arm? Was that their song?
No, I don't think that was.
I feel like that is. So.
Maybe it is. I actually kind of like them, and I have like one of their albums that I had listened to. They had a lot of like joke kind of songs,
like the drummer from Def Leppard only had one arm.
Yeah, I don't think that's the title of the song, whatever their one hit was. But
I think I saw them with Real Big Fish once.
that sounds about right.
So if you're wondering if I was doing things in the 90s, hello.
Yeah. All right. I'm trying to. No, that's the Bloodhound Gang.
That's why is everybody is always picking on me.
Yeah, it's the Bloodhound Gang. How dare you confuse the Bloodhound Gang with Nerf Herder?
You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals. So let's.
Yeah, that's the Bloodhound Gang. It's the Bloodhound Gang. So Dave, make sure to cut all of that.
This will all be on. Yeah.